So as the world gets scarier by the second, I've decided to make a little different type of video.
You're that jealous of our love, huh?
So stupid. My prince and I were supposed to have gone steady, but instead he went missing. But who are you, really?
I've been an anime fan for pretty much all my life, but lately YouTube and life really has reminded me that I've been missing a certain element from the anime I've been watching. This video was definitely inspired by channels like Anime T and Colleen's Manga Rex and Inakyu and Haryana Hook and a few other creators who convinced me to make a more concerted effort with what I've been watching. So if you're watching this video and you don't know what shoujo or josei are, I'll explain them first and then I'll give you some background on me. Shoujo and josei are two of the four general demographics for Japanese manga. Shoujo roughly translating to young girl and josei used to refer to adult woman. The obviously more popular demographics when it comes to manga and anime are shonen, directed at younger boys, and rising in popularity as of late is seinen, which is directed at adult men. Personally, I don't think that there are many hard rules that defines what gets labeled what. The types of literary genres within these four demographics literally can be anything you'd imagine. Like there are no rules really, despite what the average anime watcher might think. What I can say is I've noticed that there are certain recurring themes and tropes just like within any genre. Like yeah, a lot of shoujo or josei titles have romance as a designated section of the series, but I would say that that isn't too different from most shonen. It's pretty common for a main character to have a love interest that they end the series with. The main difference is just that in shonen it's usually trash. I like to think of demographics as a language that helps shape the way that the author presents their story. So for some background on me, I've had pretty much the stereotypical 20-something-year-old's experience when it comes to anime exposure with some normal deviations. It started off with shows on 4Kids like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And it wasn't too long after that until I fell into the funnel of niggas screaming with their shirts off. An interesting detail that I think is important is that I also have two sisters, one older and one younger. I bring that up because naturally we all developed our own taste, but we still shared stuff with each other. So I grew up with two other streams of recommendations right next to me, and as a kid I was aware of a lot broader of a range of anime. I had been exposed to a healthy variety of shows like Black Lagoon or Fooly Cooly, Ranma Half, Sayuki, Shaman King. It's weird to think back to how casually we read and watched these shows without too much influence from the internet, but that's how it was. When I hit middle school, that's when I hit the stage where I pretty much wanted to watch everything, and my tastes really started to expand. It's also around the time that anime streaming sites started to pop up and I didn't have to search for part 6B of episode 137 in English on YouTube. Or I didn't have to risk detonating my computer by downloading an episode of Zatch Bell that turned out to just be a Soulja Boy song. At the time, I also made friends with a group of girls that pretty much introduced me to weeb culture at large. And they showed me a bunch of other series that I hadn't picked up on. I was introduced to series like Ouran High School Host Club, Fruits Basket, and Skip Beat, which at the time I had no idea were shoujo series. It also couldn't be helped that I had just finished stuff like Toradora and Panty Pony Dash, so as a little dude, I really couldn't tell the difference. It's funny because even looking back, me and my older sister would try to buy the American prints of Shonen Jump or Shoujo Beat whenever we had the money to, which wasn't super often, but I was at least aware of the concept that there was a split in the demographics, but I guess I didn't correlate it back to anime. But yeah, fast forward through high school and I was just mowing anything I could watch down, especially in the slice of life or drama categories. I watched some of my favorite series of all time during this span, but looking back on it, not a lot of these series were shoujo or josei titles. I can't say with 100% conviction that I didn't have a subconscious bias to pick up a shonen rather than a shoujo series, but I do know that there were few and far between for me. So now here I am as a grown adult watching other YouTubers express their frustrations on just that. There has been a lack of exposure, accessibility, and pretty much the creation in general of shoujo and josei anime. And it's not like these YouTube creators are just shaking their fist at the internet. No, they're legitimately doing a great job promoting and recommending series new and old that just deserve more eyes on them. And it definitely unlocked something in me to make me say, okay, now I have a choice. All I have to do is step out of my comfort zone a little bit and just try to support an underrepresented series. So without further ado, this is me making the shonen jump to shoujo.
guy.
I didn't like that at all. This is my shoujo video that will be named later. I'll be giving my initial and or complete thoughts on these 3 shoujo josei titles I've picked up over the last few months. And before we kick things off, I just want to apologize for lumping shoujo and josei together. I realize that they're 2 different things and lumping them together can kind of minimize their nuances, but please have some mercy on me. I want to approach this with as much diversity as possible. Alright, let's get it out the way. This right here was some crack, and I'm glad to hear that we're getting season 3 even though it's a decade later. Fam, this show is not supposed to hit this good. If you're a shoujo veteran, you're probably rolling your eyes right now at this pick, but Kimi Ni Todoke is a modern day classic and probably the closest thing to a vanilla series you can find. From what I've seen so far, all I can say is that it takes all those classic romance tropes, grabs a clipboard, and it just executes. The first thing that stood out to me was the art style. This series uses a combination of watercolor and pastels that feels like it typifies shoujo art, at least going off the manga covers and spreads that I'm used to seeing. For me, this series was some real eye candy. Every time I put it on, I was just overwhelmed by how pretty it was. I loved how thinly outlined all the characters were, how long the limbs were, and I really enjoyed how they translated those splash pages. But beyond that, what really made me fall in love with the series were the characters, and the slow but comfy pacing to this slice of life series. The story starts with Sawako, our MC, who's a really sweet but really quiet girl. The whole thing about her is she's wildly pale with long dark hair, and that, coupled with her quietness, leads people to compare her to Sadako, the ghost girl that the Ring movies were based off of. The first arc of the series, if you want to call it that, focuses on Sawako trying to make friends in her new high school. It doesn't take long for her to get the Sadako nickname and for kids to start calling her names and just being straight up mean. It eventually escalates to the point that pretty much all the girls in her class are actively picking on her, or they're just flat out ignoring her. I think after an episode or 2 of that, we get introduced to Ayane and Chizuru, and they go on to be Sawako's best friends. They're just 2 weirdos who don't care about how much Sawako looks like an evil ghost or whatever. Looking back on it now, it's actually a really cool way to introduce part of your main cast because it isn't so much about the inciting incident itself. It just speaks to that feeling you have when you meet someone whose personality just clicks with yours. The show has a fairly simple introductory arc that at this point in 2023 we've all seen it way too many times before. The pretty but antisocial kid cringes their way through 12 episodes is a cute setting, but at this point I'm kinda cool on it. When I was watching the first couple episodes of Kimi Ni Todoke, I had the sinking feeling that this was heading down that same route. But luckily, I was stuck on a plane for 3 more hours and the only other thing I had downloaded was... So I pushed past. The show immediately gained points with me because of how they tackled the Sawako Sadako section of the story. It often teeters between being a gag and targeted bullying, but it doesn't ever feel more complicated or involved than high school drama would be at that point. The show has a really good grasp on the sensibilities of kids and teens. Not to say that I don't love a series where high schoolers look like Jotaro or pull up to school in sports cars, but with shows like this, the threshold for suspended disbelief is a lot lower. It's funny because one of the next series in this video is the exact opposite of that, but just mind your business. I didn't know this at the time, but Sawako's attitude within these early episodes would be something that really sticks with me throughout the entire show. Usually a character in this position would be very emotionally affected by all of the bullying and ostracizing, but not Sawako. She has the ability to see the bright side in everything. Part of that is because she's oblivious and ditzy as hell, but in general, I think she just chooses to not take things personally. And she stays like that for the majority of the series. The only time she's emotionally shaken in the more dramatic sense is when it has to do with her friends or those around her.
私今人生の幸せを全部使い果たしちゃってるのかも。でもそれでも嬉しいな。
Kimi Ni Todoke tackles high school drama seriously, but not too seriously. So just like being called a shower demon can be an emotionally damaging experience, it doesn't mean that the characters involved can't progress past it. Another thing Kimi Ni Todoke does differently is it doesn't solely focus on the blossoming of Sawako. It brings in a strong group of characters who are at various stages of this blossoming process themselves. I feel like in a less compelling series, we would have stayed tied to our main characters and her friends would just be there to support her. But this show didn't lean on its tropes to carry the backbone of the narrative. No, it used tropes to connect us viewers back to our younger selves. It takes us back to a time where we started becoming aware of ourselves and started building our first meaningful connections outside of home. The point I knew I was in love with this series was during the Chizuru and Ryu arc. It's quite possibly the best love triangle I've ever seen in media, but again, the pieces that construct the storyline aren't extraordinary. It just involves unrequited love, two classmates, and an older sibling that's getting married. But the conversations and the emotional maturing that took place in this arc damn near brought me to tears a few times. I wish I could just word vomit everything I love that happened during this section, but I'll just share some of my favorite lines and moments. So enjoy the clip show.
こういうのどうかな。ミニスカート。寒そう。気合が入ってないと着られない服だね。そりゃもうバリバリさ。ほら。地図ちゃん輝いてる。地図ちゃん。起こしちゃった？なんでここ来たのさ。私しばらく話しかけんなって言わなかったっけ？
じゃあ黙ってる。ちゃんと好きだったって分かってるから。
What I thought I was gonna get was a standard love story, and for the most part, I guess I did. But what I didn't see coming was how much I'd fall in love with the cast and how well the story captured coming of age themes with most of the main crew. And I think some people get caught up into thinking that coming of age storylines have to be these big symbolic conflicts that end with a giant robot fight. There are many ways to express that period of a kid's life where they're becoming more and more aware of themselves and the kids around them. In Kimi Ni Todoke, these moments are so transient it literally feels like real life. If you watched any of my videos on the channel, one of my big sticking points on the shows that I like are the ways that characters interact with each other. And in Kimi Ni Todoke, it feels like I'm watching a group of anime kids but with such human traits and responses that I can almost swap these characters out with people that I actually knew at that time in my life. Ayane and Chizuru are pretty much carbon copies of those middle school friends that introduced me to all of those shoujo series in the first place, and that just feels right. So for all three of the series I'll be covering in this video, I'm gonna try and leave you guys with a recommendation. I haven't seen this series in a while, so it might have warped in my memory, but my rec is a series that I watched called Hanasuka Iroha. It's nowhere near the same series, and it is a shonen I think, so I can't say it's safe from any crazy fan service. I was like 15 when I watched it though, so I'm assuming something wild does pop up. But what I do know is it captured a really similar vibe of that real everyday life. It's a 26 episode series that follows a girl named Hannah who lives at home with her single mother until one day her mother says she's getting married and moving to the US. Obviously, you would assume a single mother is going to take her daughter with her when she moves 2,000 miles across the world, but nah. Instead, Hannah moves in with her grandmother who lives in and runs an inn somewhere in the countryside of Japan. While she's there, Hannah has to grow up, and the anime follows her developing her own relationship with hard work and trying to figure out how to be part of a team/family. It's about as slice of life as you can get, so there are definitely some slower moments and a bit of teenage nonsense, but I really enjoyed it for what it was, and it brought out that same level of self-development and self-actualization that this series does so well with. Switching gears here, the next series I picked up is actually a josei manga by the name of Yawato Katako. And if you think I'm butchering these names, I know. In English, the title is A Queen and an Old Maid. I came across this series after hearing about it in one of Colleen's videos, and the way they described it combined with it only being like 36 chapters pretty much sold me. After doing some online research, I noticed that the manga is still considered ongoing, so this may just be the first part, but I'm not sure if there are any other chapters that have been translated to English yet. I'm gonna be honest, I feel a little weird talking about this series because it could not be clear that I'm not the intended audience for it, but it doesn't mean I didn't love the series, so here I go. Yawa to Katako is a series about a woman in her late 20s who struggles with her self-image. Our main character, Fujiko, is constantly making self-deprecating comments and spends most of her inner dialogue complaining about the unfairness of beauty standards. In her mind, a woman is small, cute, and soft, and she doesn't fit that bill. She sees herself as tall, tough, and awkward. In her words, she doesn't deserve to be seen as a woman. Despite her low self-esteem and reclusive attitude, she has her best friend Kumi. Kumi is pretty much the textbook idea of a woman to Fujiko. She fits all the criteria, but it's Kumi who pretty much forces Fujiko to be a functioning person. While at a mixer that I'm sure Kumi dragged her to, Fujiko meets a good-looking lawyer named Koyanagi. Through an exchange of unexpected dialogue, Koyanagi offers to help transform Fujiko into a more popular girl, and there's our story. Stepping out of the summary a bit, the twist that made me read it, and I'm pretty sure what brings a lot of people to this story, is that Koyanagi is queer, and more specifically, bi. Although he initially appears confident and in control, the story also explores his struggles with being a queer man in a society that's filled with prejudice and bigotry. I found myself really engrossed with how clear and socially aware he was as a character. I'm new to the sphere of anime and queer representation in media in general, but I feel like Koyanagi's character is equally as grounded and relatable as Fujiko. I feel like he could have easily been written as like the queer version of the magical Negro trope we have in Western media. A lesser series would have him serve no other purpose but to magically appear, snap his fingers, and help Fujiko knock some boots. So at first I struggled with Fujiko because she really tap danced on that line between being relatable and being draining. She often spirals into talking down on herself, and she's quick to push her friends away. If you've ever dealt with similar struggles or know someone who has, the first couple chapters can be really difficult to sit through, but it's definitely worth it. What makes this story immediately stand out for me is that it tackles her body dysphoria as not just a symptom of her not fitting the trends of women's beauty standards. It really dives into the cycle of self-hatred that can't be solved with just a makeover. It forces Fujiko to establish her own idea of self-worth rather than just adopting someone else's. Fujiko herself stands out to me because although there are times I want to hit my head hearing her complain about what it means to be a woman, she gets up the next day and she tries. Sometimes it's a few days later, but she'll put on a dress, or she'll go out to a wedding, or she'll go to another mixer, and that made me sympathize with her struggle so much. She's just searching for a way to fill this void in her life and in herself, and socially, these are the tools that she and other women are told will fix it. Eventually, she shifts away from her original viewpoint as she recognizes that she was just romanticizing and seeking the male gaze to validate her, and then she starts to develop new ideals. I love the nuance there. This series is exactly what I wanted to see out of an adult-centered romance. There's just enough depth and breadth to these characters, and that was developed with the outfit changes, the alternating hangout spots, and that weird desire to go out and get lit but then ending the night questioning why you went out in the first place. There were more than a few times that I felt like I was watching a sitcom or a drama or something. I don't know what it is. I like seeing them text each other at work, or meeting up on the weekends, or running into old exes. I think it just has a very realistic cadence when it comes to actual adult friendships, and that goes a long way when you're trying to build friendship and attraction. Whenever Fujiko and Kumi or Fujiko and Koyanagi don't hang out for a chapter or two, it feels like ages goes by, but it really just makes sense. I mean, I pretty much see my friends on a seasonal basis at this point, and it just be like that. And on that note, I want to applaud the friends in this story. I was surprised by how well the different friend groups supported their main characters while still feeling like real people, sort of. Now, there were some characters who are there purely to serve a role and move the plot forward, but you can tell as soon as you read their speech bubble. I really loved Koyanagi's friends at the bar he goes to after work. They were hilarious, and they're just as eager to help their friend as they are to hear some new gossip. And on the other side, Kumi is a great friend for Fujiko because she does a great job gently nudging Fujiko to get out of her head. She also plays gacha games, so I'm already in the Kumi fan club. This is definitely Fujiko and Koyanagi's story, but I feel like I got a good sense of who these characters are, both in and outside of their roles that they play in the main characters' lives. I think for recommendations, I have one for y'all and one for me, I guess. For y'all, my recommendation is Of the Seinen Variety. I think the series March Comes In Like a Lion is a good manga that focuses on battling self-doubt, and it explores how reliable friendships and a shift in mindset are essential to strengthening your mental health. My rec for myself is Princess Jellyfish. I watched the first 3 episodes with my sisters earlier in the summer, but I definitely felt a strong correlation with those episodes and the early chapters of this manga, so I definitely have to double back and finish that. This series is something, and I don't know how else to describe it. When I first saw a random image from this show on Twitter, my brain just kinda Control-Alt-Deleted. Like, it was an immediate serotonin boost. I had no idea what it was about, but just looking at it was making me feel things. The vibes looked amazing, the art style is something I can only compare to like Ouran High School Host Club, but the saturation and color choices of it adds another dimension for me to hyperfixate on. Once I saw it and I read the synopsis, I knew I had to at least watch 1 episode. And now, after finishing the whole show, I think the best way I can start this is by bringing it to you and reading the synopsis. So here's what they have on Mal. Years ago, a tragic incident befell a young princess when both her parents died. Devastated, it seemed nothing would calm this poor soul. However, a prince traveling through the area came to see the princess, hoping to cheer her up. After wiping her sorrowful tears, the prince gave her a ring carrying a rose emblem, and told her as long as she holds onto the ring, they are destined to meet again. The event leaves a deep impression on the girl, Utena Tenjo, leading her to become a prince herself. Years later, Utena attends Otori Academy, recognized by the same rose emblem as her precious rings. She witnesses Anthy Himamiya tending the flowers, accompanied by the student council president Toga Kiryu and vice president Kyuchi Saionji, who seem to be arguing over Anthy. While Utena thinks nothing of the occurrence, the student council gathers to discuss an important matter. Subsequently, a misunderstanding leads Utena being dragged into the world of the duelists, those with rings similar to her own. The duelists fight for the ownership of the Rose Bride, Anthy Himamiya, who is said to possess great power. Wanting to prove her capabilities as a prince and enraged that Anthy was being wronged and objectified, Utena resolves to fight against the duelists to save her from the cruel fate. Also, I just want to add that the duelists are generally the members of the student council, so guys like Toga Kiryu and Saionji.
Hi, Wakaba. I don't usually see you reading in class. What book might that be? Huh?
Always. She's always loved this guy. But after she's rejected, the next day she gets over it, another man appears and she falls for him. When I read this before, I thought it was the lamest, stupidest book I ever read. And now I think it's the greatest. I told you were my true love! Utena! Utena! Utena!
So I know that summary doesn't necessarily give you a whole idea of what this is about, but I'll just let you know my thoughts. The series plays with gender and sexuality in a way that at first felt like it was fresh out of a Wattpad archive. I thought I was witnessing an absurd escapist fantasy, but nah. When searching up this series online, I've seen a lot of the discourse around it draws comparisons between it and Neon Genesis Evangelion. And funny enough, I had just finished EVA, so I was really trying to wrap my head around the comp. The major reason for the comparison is that they're both written in this particular style that I can only summarize as like psychological drama meets coming of age action series. From that perspective, yeah, I can kind of see the resemblance. The comparison kind of gets a little more interesting if you look at Utena as like a shoujo representation of this type of writing, and Evangelion as the rep for like shonen. But I don't know the history of shoujo or josei, especially when it comes to stories that are this weird. So beyond that, I don't really want to tie the two series together because I think watching both of them tonally and structurally, they're nothing alike. Utena draws from like fantasy, princess media, and other magical girl series, whereas Evangelion pulls from its sci-fi setting and the mecha genre of anime and manga. Both pull from psychological dramas, but in Utena I found myself more drawn to the characters as individuals rather than their significance to the plot. And I think for the most part it was vice versa for Eva. As soon as I watched the first episode of the series, I fell in love with Utena. She's this too cool, athletic, tomboyish girl who just does what she wants. I saw someone comment something like, Utena is an I'm not like those other girls but without the misogyny, and I don't know what that really means, but yeah, something like that. All the girls love her, and rightfully so. Within the first few minutes of meeting her, we get a sense of her charisma and her attitude, and we also see her being scolded by a teacher for continuing to wear a boy's uniform to school. And those are pretty much her most important traits. She's cool, gender non-conforming, and she's kind-hearted. And also, I don't know why, even though she definitely isn't wearing the girl's uniform, the blazer that she is wearing is definitely not like what all the other boys are wearing. So, yeah. We also get to meet Wakaba, who is Utena's hilarious best friend and one of my favorite characters throughout the show. We also meet Seonji and Toga, the vice president and president of the student council, and we meet Anthy Himamiya, the Rose Bride. We're told early on that Anthy has a secret power that could change the world stored within her. Through the entire run of the show, the student council members as well as a few other people have the goal of being the one who marries Anthy and gets to keep her power, and the only way to do that is to win her hand in a duel.
I remember when I was a little girl, I used to believe my mother when she'd tell me that I was a beautiful princess from the Onion Kingdom.
Because you've always had such a huge forehead.
Although every episode pretty much draws towards the duel for Anthy, the duels themselves are hardly ever the most compelling part of the episode. The drama between the characters is what gets you really invested, and where the themes of romance and coming of age shines through. It's not the brightest, but it shines. For example, in episode 1 we find out that Wakaba has a crush on Seonji and wants to write him a letter to confess her love to him. I know it's so original, but don't be mean. She writes it and she sneaks it into his locker hoping to hear back from him. Good guy Seonji decides to be a jerk and embarrasses Wakaba by nailing the letter to the school bulletin board for everyone to see. Seonji at the time was the last one to win Anthy's hand in a duel, and therefore he was engaged to her, but man was he terrible. The combination of Seonji's abusive behavior as well as him disrespecting her best friend leads Utena to challenge Seonji to a fight, and this is how Utena gets wrapped into the whole Rose Bride fiasco. Every character in this series has their own melodramatic but at times heartfelt arc. And I really like how certain characters' decisions bleed over and affect one another's personal journeys. Because here in episode 1 we have this inciting incident that ropes Utena into the student council's duels, but that's not where that storyline lies. Wakaba and Seonji's respective and combined arcs are actually really engaging. We see how Seonji grapples with losing his access to Anthy, and we see how Wakaba tries to rationalize what exactly she sees in Seonji.
Your devotion is more than I could have hoped for.
No, it's perfect. Just perfect. The way it is.
Besides Utena, Wakaba, and Anthy, I was really drawn to Juri, another member of the student council. At first she comes off as this quiet but kind of intimidating type. She has this air of perfection about her, and most of the other council members think she's going to be the one with the Rose Bride. The way the story breaks down Juri's mask to show her as a vulnerable and grieving kid was just another way the story surprised me. I was very happy with the way her story ended, even though it didn't get nearly as much time as it deserved. So, the show is very dramatic, but I think for the most part it's aware of its ridiculousness. There are tons of gags and a few self-referential jokes that makes it a little easier to not take the show too seriously. There are also a lot of early 90s absurd weird anime stuff that I can't even begin to tell you what it means. Now, there are many glaring flaws with this show, but I'm going to talk about what I think the two biggest ones were. The first one I didn't mind too much, and the second one made this show very difficult to finish. And both make the series kind of impossible to recommend, at least in this day and age. The first is just the amount of reused animation, and I'm not even trying to hate. Like, it's to the point where if you were to pick any episode from out of a hat, I guarantee you anywhere from 15 to 50% of that episode is going to be repurposed animation from previous episodes. Like every time we have a duel, the show has the same 1.5 minute song and animation play. I didn't mind it that much until certain arcs started to drag out, but for the most part, I guess I didn't mind it. The duels reuse a lot of frames as well, but the frames themselves look pretty cool, and most of the times the duels don't even really matter. Even with the discount animation, it doesn't detract from the point of the episode, or the point of the duel itself really. The second point that I just couldn't ignore is all of the incest type vibes and weird sexualization of these kids. It's wild, and it honestly made me put down the series more times than I would have liked, just going off the conflicts and plot lines that are in the series. Towards the end, it gets really bad with blatant allusions to all types of trigger warnings. It's frustrating because I'm not exactly sure how much of any of it services the story other than to try and add to this loss of innocence aspect that they have going on. But I think a lot of it just falls down to that age-old anime disease of, hey, but this is crazy, right? But yo, remember when I said I didn't want to compare it to Ava? I might have to take that back. Just for this point. Now that I think about it, what both of these series do share is this sense of a disconnect between the story and its characters. And it's not in a bad way, at least I don't think. Like, once you get so far into them, you start to realize how much more fleshed out the characters are as opposed to the plot events that further develop them. And I don't know if I'm even mad at that because it's usually the other way around in other anime. You usually get a bit more simplified characters and really elaborate or symbolic plot points, or really well developed lore and strong world building. In this case, I think I'm here for the diversity because it really helps me focus on the characters and trying to figure out why they are who they are. Oh, and Utena has a movie that wraps up the ending too, like End of Evangelion, so I guess these shows are like two peas in a pod. Overall, this show will hold a special place in my memories because this was a very unique experience. Will I go back to it? Hell no, maybe just the movie. But Juri, Wakaba, and Utena will forever have my heart.
What is that?
Someone tacked somebody's love letter up on the board.
Love letter?
Tell me something. Why do you wear a boy's uniform, Miss Utena?
What? This? Well, because I like to.
It's all right with me.
All in all, man, watch some damn shoujo. I didn't initially come into these series as a prompt for this video, but I'm happy I got to talk about all of them. I generally had a good time with all of these series and they were a great reintroduction to this side of anime and manga. I also was afraid of tackling my first proper anime video essay by covering a shonen series, and I feel like my overall enjoyment of shonen has gone down the more I engage with the discourse online, so I was more than happy to step into something new and different and from my point of view, not as toxic. You know the deal, if you have anything you want to add, drop it in the comments and let's have a dialogue. If you like what you hear, there's more in the tuck and make sure you check my last video out. And I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.